I still remember the sting, not just of the water, but of their words. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of slow, quiet day where the sun slips gently through the curtains, and for a moment, you believe maybe, just maybe, everything will be okay. The boiling splash hit my arm before the crash of ceramic even registered. I gasped. The towel slipped from my hands. I winced in pain, but Nora didn't even get up. "Come on, Mom," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "He's just a kid. Don't be so sensitive." I looked at her. That day something shifted, something final, not because of the pain, but because of how easily they dismissed it, like I didn't even count. So I left. And when I walked out that door, I took something they've come to regret more than they'll ever admit. Leave a comment if you've ever been told to just let it go when it hurt the most. I read every one. And if you want to know what I took and why they still haven't recovered, then subscribe. This isn't just about walking away. It's about finding yourself again. I didn't even see the mug leave his hand. 1 second I was slicing pears in the kitchen, his favorite, peeled the way he liked, and the next, the sharp clatter of ceramic hitting tile rang out like a gunshot. Heat exploded across my wrist and forearm. My skin prickled, then screamed, red blooming in patches as I stumbled back, nearly dropping the paring knife. My mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. The pain hit fast, boiling, raw. I could feel the sting deep in the nerves. My hand trembled as I grabbed the dish towel off the counter and pressed it against the burn. The fabric caught the heat and made it worse, but I had nothing else. In the living room, he stood there. Jordan, my grandson. 10 years old, barely tall enough to reach the top shelf, but plenty strong enough to hurl a mug halfway across the room. His face didn't show fear or regret, just a mild kind of annoyance, like I'd interrupted a game. "Why would you do that?" I managed, my voice hoarse. He shrugged. "You weren't listening." And that was it. No apology, no hint of guilt. Just a child making it clear that he didn't see me as someone worth explaining himself to. I turned to Nora, my daughter-in-law, expecting, hoping, for something. Shock, anger, discipline, anything. She didn't even glance up from her phone. "He's just a kid," she said, like that made it okay. "Stop overreacting. He didn't mean it." Didn't mean it. That's what they always said. Every bruise, every insult, every time he screamed in my face or threw a tantrum that left something broken in its wake, he didn't mean it. Just a kid. Just a phase. I looked down at my arm. The skin was already blistering, turning a pale, angry pink. "Look at this," I said, holding it out toward her. My voice shook, but I wasn't yelling. I just needed her to see it. Nora sighed and finally looked up. Her eyes grazed over the burn, then flicked back to her screen. "Put some aloe on it. You'll be fine." I stood there, towel pressed to my skin, and something in me gave way. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. The kind of shift that happens when you realize the people you've been sacrificing for don't even see you bleeding. I went upstairs without another word. In the bathroom mirror, the burn looked worse. It pulsed under the light, angry and raw. I ran cool water over it, then found a half-used burn ointment I'd stashed from last winter, back when I scalded my thumb making soup for them. I remember Jordan calling it gross, and Nora saying I needed to be more careful. That time, I apologized. I didn't this time. The house was quiet by the time I came back down. My son Adam had gotten home from work and was in the den. I peeked in. He was already halfway into a beer, tie loosened, shoes off. I stood in the doorway, my arm now wrapped in a thin layer of gauze. "Jordan threw boiling water on me today," I said softly. Adam didn't look up. I said, "Your son?" He threw hot water at me. "I have a second-degree burn." He finally turned, his expression tired. "Nora said it was an accident. Don't blow this up, Mom. He's just a kid." That phrase again. As if being young was a shield. As if I should be the one apologizing for being hurt. I wanted to scream. To ask Adam where the boy I raised had gone. The one who used to cry if he thought I was sad. The one I stayed up with on every school night, ironing uniforms and heating soup for his colds. Instead, I said nothing. Because deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just about today. This was about every time they dismissed me. Every time I was called too sensitive. Too much. Every time I bit my tongue for the sake of peace. But peace is a one-sided bargain when you're the only one paying for it. So I turned, walked upstairs, and packed a bag. Just enough to last a few days. Toothbrush. Sweater. The photo of Adam as a baby, tucked into a paperback. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I just left the house they never let me call home. And when I left, I didn't take revenge. I took something worse. I took the part of me they always thought would stay. The part that forgave. The part that cooked, cleaned, and gave until there was nothing left. I took her with me. And I didn't look back. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside. Not just the wind, but the kind that gets into your bones. The kind that reminds you you've overstayed your welcome in someone else's house. I clutched my sweater tighter, felt the weight of the little bag on my shoulder, light as it was. I didn't have a plan, just distance. I needed to put space between me and them, my son, my grandson, and that woman who called herself family. I didn't even know where I was walking. The sidewalk was cracked, broken in places, and I stepped around each uneven slab like I was dodging landmines. The burn on my arm throbbed, a dull ache that pulsed with my heartbeat. I hadn't cried yet. I thought maybe I would once I got far enough away. But no tears came. Not yet. I walked past the park where I used to push Adam on the swings, back when he couldn't even tie his own shoes. He used to look up at me like I hung the moon. "Higher, Mama!" he'd shout, kicking his tiny feet, cheeks flushed with laughter. Where did that boy go? When had he stopped looking at me like someone who mattered? I found a bus stop with a bench and sat down, the metal cold even through my jeans. It was late, the streets mostly empty. A few cars passed, their headlights cutting across the sidewalk, but none slowed. Nobody looked twice at the older woman sitting there with a suitcase and a bandaged arm. That's the thing people don't tell you about being invisible. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, quiet. You don't wake up one day forgotten. You shrink a little every time someone talks over you, dismisses your worry, leaves your birthday unmentioned. You tell yourself it's fine, it's just this once, until it becomes always. The bus arrived. I didn't know where it was going. I asked the driver how far it went and handed him a few bills without asking how much. I took a seat at the very back and stared out the window as the town slipped past in flickering bursts of streetlight. I ended up at a cheap motel just outside the city, the kind with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed even after midnight. The girl behind the counter didn't ask questions. She slid me a key without looking me in the eye. Room 204. The bedspread was scratchy, the bathroom smelled faintly of mildew, and the lamp had to be kicked at the base to turn on. But it was quiet, and it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally unwrapped my arm. The gauze peeled away slowly, revealing the angry red skin underneath. The sight made my stomach twist. Not from the pain, but because I knew that if I'd stayed, it would have happened again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually. They'd say I provoked him, that I was too strict, too opinionated, too present. And Jordan, he would grow into a man who never learned the weight of his own actions, just like his father had. That night, I didn't sleep much. The bed creaked with every breath, and the burn pulsed like a second heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling until the darkness softened into gray. Around 5 in the morning, I pulled out my phone and opened my gallery. Scrolled through old photos. Me and Adam at the zoo. Me holding Jordan when he was just a few months old, swaddled tight, eyes closed. I looked so proud, so full of hope. I deleted them, one by one. Not out of anger, but because I needed to make room. Not on the phone, in me. Because somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself inside their lives. I'd been a mother first, a grandmother next. I cooked, cleaned, patched holes, remembered birthdays they forgot, stayed up late boiling herbs when they had a cough. I asked for so little, but it turns out even that was too much. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going back. Not even if they called. Not even if they cried. I would no longer beg for love from people who measured my worth by what I did for them. They had made it clear I was replaceable. But I wasn't. They just didn't know it yet. And by the time they realized what I'd taken with me, it would already be too late. Morning came quiet, gray, and empty. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, feet planted on the stained carpet, burn wrapped again in fresh gauze. My limbs were stiff. My back ached from the terrible mattress. But there was something else, an ache deeper than the bone. A kind of numbness that doesn't come from cold or injury, but from something that's been chipped away too long. I used to think a mother's role was to hold everything together, no matter the cost. Smile through it. Stay calm. Stay kind. Be the bridge when everyone else burns theirs down. But bridges break too, eventually. Especially when they're the only thing holding the weight. My phone buzzed for the first time that morning. I stared at the screen. Adam. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. Just let it ring twice more that hour. Then silence. I sat with that silence. Let it settle in my chest. Felt it spreading in my ribs like a kind of freedom. Like breath after being underwater too long. When noon came, I checked out. The receptionist didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept. I caught my reflection in the glass door as I left, hair disheveled, eyes tired, lips set in a straight, hard line. Not someone anyone would call soft anymore. Not someone you could ignore in a room. There was only one place left in the world I could go. I took a long bus ride out past the city limits, where the streets turned from potholes to dust, where the air smelled like dry grass, and the sky stretched wider than it ever did back in the suburbs. I hadn't been back to the old house in years, not since I left it behind to move in with Adam and Nora. It wasn't much, just a rundown single story with rust creeping over the gutters and weeds taller than my waist. But it was mine and Daniel's. We built that life from nothing, planted every flower in the yard with our bare hands. I could still hear his voice sometimes in the breeze, telling me to add more basil by the porch because it kept the mosquitoes away. When he died, that house was the only thing he left me. And I, stupidly, blindly, sold it to help Adam buy their dream home. I remember the way he'd said it, with those pleading eyes. "Mom, we'll all be together. It'll be easier on you too." He made it sound like a gift, like a rescue. But it had been the beginning of my erasure. Now, I stood on the edge of that land again, staring at the cracked concrete steps and wondering what kind of fool sells her lifeline for a promise that never came. Except I hadn't sold all of it. Behind the main house, long since sold to a couple who'd painted it a cheerful blue and put up plastic flamingos in the yard, was the shed. Just a tool shed. Rusted roof, warped door, but still legally mine. I'd held on to it when we sold the property, tucked it into the contract as an auxiliary storage structure that wasn't worth the trouble to remove. They agreed to let me keep it, probably thinking I was sentimental. Maybe I was. But now, I saw it for what it was. A beginning. The key still worked. The door creaked open, stale air rushing past me, thick with dust and cobwebs. It smelled like the past, not the painful parts, the parts before. I coughed, waved the dust away, and stepped inside. There wasn't much. An old folding chair, a broken ladder, a plastic bin of canning jars I'd forgotten. But the walls were sturdy. The roof held. There was room, and no one here to sigh when I spoke. No one to call me dramatic. No one to say, "He's just a kid." I sat in the chair and let the silence swallow me whole. That's when the tears finally came. They weren't loud, just slow, steady drops that fell onto my lap, warm and quiet, as if my body was finally catching up to everything I'd lost. Not just in the last day, but over years. Years of giving, bending, shrinking, apologizing for needing even the smallest kindness. But in that little shed, surrounded by dust and memory, I made a vow. They didn't get to burn me down and keep the warmth. They didn't get to throw me out and expect I'd disappear. I wasn't gone. I was rebuilding. And this time, the life I made would be mine, start to finish. They had no idea what I'd taken with me. But soon, they would. The first night in the shed was colder than I expected. I lay curled on the folding chair, a threadbare blanket pulled up to my chin. Every creak of the wind made the walls shudder. There was no insulation, no real comfort, just a roof and 4 wooden panels holding back the night. But even as my fingers stiffened and my toes went numb, I didn't miss the house I'd left behind. Not the plush guest bed, not the heated floors, not even the meals I used to make. Because warmth means nothing when the people around you leave you cold. I stared into the darkness, listening to the wind tangle through the trees, and wondered if Adam had even noticed I wasn't coming back. Maybe he thought I was just sulking, that I'd return once I calmed down, that I'd knock on the door like a scolded child and apologize for bleeding too loud. But I knew better now. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was walking away from the version of me they'd carved to suit their needs. Quiet, convenient, disposable. By morning, I could barely feel my legs. I pulled myself up slowly, every joint stiff like rusted hinges. My arms still throbbed under the gauze. I changed the wrap with water I'd stored in a thermos and forced myself to move, if only to stay warm. It had been years since I'd come back to this town, but my feet remembered the way. I walked down the road past the old grain store, past the broken mailbox still marked with my name, faded and peeling. The town looked different, smoother roads, a new cafe where the bakery used to be, but the air was the same. Earthy, honest. It didn't lie to you the way the suburbs did. It didn't cover cruelty and politeness or package neglect as independence. I passed a group of kids walking to school, backpacks bouncing, laughter chasing their heels. One of them looked up and smiled. Not out of pity or habit, just because. I gave a small wave. My hand trembled from the cold. Then I heard it. "Linda Walker? Is that you?" I turned, and there she was. Marianne Boyd, from the post office. A little older, hair gone completely silver, but the same bright eyes and the same nosy tilt to her head. "I thought that was you," she said, stepping closer, squinting like the sun was trying to trick her. "We all thought you moved to the city for good. What brings you back?" I swallowed. For a moment, I thought about lying, saying I was visiting, just passing through. But something about her voice, about this place, it didn't deserve lies. Not anymore. "I left my son's place," I said simply. Her mouth twitched. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Well, she said after a pause, the town's quieter now, but it still remembers its own. You need anything, you come by. The post office has got heat at least. That night, I made a fire in a rusted barrel I found behind the shed. I burned old newspaper, bits of scrap wood, anything I could get my hands on. The flames cracked and danced, and for the first time in weeks, I felt warmth that didn't come with conditions. I sat in front of that fire for hours, watching it lick the night air, sparks rising like stars. And in that moment, something inside me caught flame too. Not anger, not even sadness. Resolve. I hadn't just walked away from their home. I'd walked back into mine. And it wasn't much, not yet. But it was mine to rebuild, mine to shape. No one else's. They'd think I was being emotional, irrational. Maybe Nora would call it a tantrum. Adam would roll his eyes and tell people I was being dramatic again. The morning after the fire, I smelled like smoke and ash, and for the first time in years, I didn't mind. The scent clung to my sweater, settled into my hair, nestled in the crook of my elbow like something alive. Something earned. There was something deeply satisfying about it. Proof I had survived another night. Proof that I didn't vanish the second I stepped outside their door. I was still here. Cold, sore, and aching. But alive in a way I hadn't been for a long time. I boiled water in an old tin can over the last glowing coals. Used it to clean the bandage on my arm, though the skin underneath still looked raw and angry. I didn't have ointment, just the heat of the fire and the determination to keep going. It wasn't just about the injury anymore. It was what the injury revealed. The way they looked past it, like it wasn't real, like I wasn't real. I could have been a shadow for all they cared, a sound they chose to ignore. I needed a job. I knew that much. The money I had left was small, maybe enough for a week or two if I stretched it. But I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. Not to them, not anymore, but to myself. The town notice board was still outside the co-op, pinned full of curled-up flyers and faded printouts. Lost dogs, yard sales, an offer to fix fences. Near the corner, something caught my eye. Help wanted, elementary school, kitchen and dormitory. Call Mr. Harris. A number was scrawled in ink. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over my phone screen for longer still. What would I say? That I used to cook dinner for people who never said thank you? That I knew how to make meals from scraps because I was always the last one to eat? I called anyway. The voice that answered was slow and a little raspy. "This is Harris," it said, like I'd woken him up from a nap he'd been waiting all week to take. "Mr. Harris," I said, "this is Linda Walker. I'm calling about the notice on the board." There was a pause, then a shift in his tone. "Linda Walker, I remember you." He didn't say it with pity or surprise, just recognition, like my name had been waiting somewhere in the back of his mind, like it had never fully disappeared. "We need help," he said simply. "And if you're half the cook your church bake sale record says you are, we need you." That afternoon, I walked to the school. It sat on the edge of town, tucked between a faded cornfield and an overgrown track. The building was small, a patchwork of repairs and rusted pipes. Paint peeled from the door frames. The playground was cracked, the swings sagged with rust, and the roof looked like it might give up in the next hard rain. But it was still standing, and so was I. Mr. Harris met me at the side entrance. He was older than I remembered, thinner too, but his eyes were sharp behind thick glasses. He gave me a nod and held the door open without fanfare. "We don't have much," he said, "but the kids deserve better than soggy mystery meat and cold cereal." I walked into the kitchen and took a long, silent look around. The stove had one working burner. The fridge door didn't seal properly. The pantry had more dust than ingredients. But I didn't flinch. I'd made miracles with less. I turned back to him, my voice steady. If I'm in charge of this kitchen, we do it my way. We start with real food, real care. He looked at me for a moment. Then he grinned. Deal. That night, I went back to the shed, sat by the fire, and stared at the stars through a crack in the roof. I hadn't just found a job. I'd found the first brick in something new. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a leftover. I felt like someone they'd regret letting go. The kitchen smelled like rust and resignation. The first time I stepped behind the counter, I ran my fingers along the edge of the prep table and came away with a layer of dust so thick it could have cushioned a fall. A single pot sat on the stovetop, dented and burnt on the bottom. The cabinets creaked when I opened them, and the pantry, if you could even call it that, held exactly 3 cans of baked beans, a bag of stale pasta, and flour so old it had gone gray around the edges. Mr. Harris hovered behind me, pretending not to be embarrassed. But I saw it in the way he scratched the back of his neck, in the way his eyes darted to the exit like he didn't want to see me give up. I know it's bad, he said, but we've made do. I turned slowly, lifted my chin. You haven't made do. You've made quiet hunger. He looked at me then, really looked, and he didn't argue. The first meal I made wasn't pretty. It wasn't some miraculous spread or a culinary masterpiece. It was just soup, chicken bones I begged off the butcher, boiled down with cabbage, garlic, and a handful of carrots from the market discount bin. I made rice too, bulked it with lentils, seasoned it with salt I found in the teacher's lounge. I stayed up all night prepping. My back ached, my knees burned. But when I ladled that soup into rows of mismatched bowls and saw the first child take a bite, then another, I felt something inside me shift. They weren't just eating, they were tasting. Cheeks flushed from the heat, little fingers wrapped around warm spoons, eyes wide and hungry. A second grader with chipped glasses looked up at me like I was magic. Miss Linda, he said, voice hushed like he didn't want to jinx it. This doesn't taste like cardboard. I smiled and ruffled his hair. That's because it's made by someone who gives a damn. The teachers noticed too. One of them slipped a note into my apron pocket that read, "You're the best thing to happen to this school since indoor plumbing." It should have made me laugh. Instead, I stepped outside and cried into the crook of my arm. Not because I was sad, because for once, I was being seen. Word got around. People started asking questions. Parents who never set foot near the school before were sending Tupperware with their kids, asking if they could bring home leftovers. I started waking up earlier just to stretch the ingredients, add a few more cups of broth, cut the bread thinner, but toast it to hide the trick. Some days I worried I wouldn't have enough, that someone would go home hungry on my watch. So I did what I had to. I walked back into town, knocked on the doors of every small shop and stall I could find. I told them who I was. I told them what I was doing. Some turned me away, but more didn't. A butcher gave me soup bones for free. A grocer let me pick through the bruised apples and onions. A florist who kept a few chickens in the back offered a dozen eggs every Thursday. I'd come home to the shed each night with aching arms and a full heart. I'd line up the ingredients like puzzle pieces, sit in the dirt, and start planning the next day's menu. I still had nothing of my own. No bed, no refrigerator, no running water. But I was feeding 50 children a day. And in the process, I was feeding something inside me I didn't even know had starved. I didn't hear from Adam. Not even a single text. Maybe they thought I was bluffing, that I'd come crawling back once the dust settled. Let them wait. Let them wonder what I was doing, where I was, how I was surviving without them. They thought they'd pushed me into the dirt and left me there. But I wasn't buried. I was planting. The frost came early that year. It crept across the fields in long white fingers, brittle and sharp, painting the ground with a kind of silence that swallowed even the sound of my breath. The shed, never warm to begin with, turned into an icebox overnight. The thin blanket I used crackled with cold, stiff as cardboard, and when I exhaled, I could see my breath hanging in the air like smoke. I hadn't felt my toes in hours. I pulled on every layer I owned, 2 sweaters, a scarf, the old coat I'd stuffed behind the pantry years ago, and found again under a stack of rusted tools. I shoved newspaper into my shoes for insulation. The fire barrel had gone cold sometime in the night, and there wasn't much left to burn but damp kindling and the last of an old drawer I'd broken apart 2 days ago. I sat hunched on the crate I used as a stool, hands shaking as I held them out over the flames I finally coaxed back to life. They flickered, weak but alive, just like me. It was enough for now. At the school, the windows fogged from inside. I watched the children through the glass as I carried my basket of groceries in from the market. Their heads were bent over books, over coloring pages and math work, their breath steaming in the cold air. The heating system barely worked, just like everything else. I set my bag down in the kitchen and opened it. A dozen donated eggs, 2 soft heads of cabbage, a pack of near-expired sausages from the corner grocer who now left them in a bag behind the store, with my name scribbled on it in marker. It would be enough to make something warm, something that filled more than just stomachs. I worked in silence, moving with a rhythm that had become second nature now. Slice, boil, stir, season, taste, repeat. The new apron they'd given me was too big, the strings hanging low, but it was clean, and it was mine. The soup that day had a name the kids would laugh at, poor man's stew, but it filled the kitchen with the scent of garlic and thyme and a kind of comfort that didn't have a name. When the bell rang for lunch, they filed in like they always did, little feet slapping against linoleum, backpacks dragging, noses red from the cold. "Miss Linda," one of them shouted, "I smelled you from the hallway." I laughed. I hope that's a compliment. "It is," he grinned. "My tummy told me so." They lined up, holding out trays with chipped edges and stickers on the bottom. Some of them wore gloves with holes in the fingers. Some didn't wear gloves at all. I ladled stew into their bowls, watched the way their shoulders relaxed as the heat hit their faces. I knew that feeling. That kind of warmth could hold you together on the worst days. They thanked me. Every single one of them. That's the thing, kids know. They know when something is made with care, when someone is paying attention. They know when love is real, even if they don't know the word for it yet. After they'd eaten, one of the girls, maybe 9 or 10, stayed behind. She stood near the counter, swaying on her toes, gripping something in her mittened hand. "What's that you've got there?" I asked, wiping my hands on the apron. She held it out, folded construction paper, messy with glitter and crayon. Inside, a drawing of a big woman in a pink apron, holding a spoon like a sword. Underneath, in crooked letters, "Miss Linda is a kitchen knight." I nearly dropped the cloth. "A knight?" I asked, my throat tight. She nodded, serious. "You save us from bad lunches." I crouched down slowly, touched her cheek with my gloved hand. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." That night, I sat by the fire again, clutching that card like it was worth more than gold. Because it was. Because it came from someone who saw me. Not what I could do. Not what I could give. Me. The wind howled outside the shed, and the stars blinked down like they were trying to remember my name. I didn't mind the cold as much that night. Back in the city, Adam still hadn't called. Nora hadn't texted. I imagined them sitting at the dinner table, glancing at the empty seat, thinking I was just being stubborn. Let them think. They had no idea that while they were forgetting me, others were remembering me for the first time. And I had no plans to disappear again. The day the letter came, it was raining hard enough to drown silence. It started as a soft drizzle before dawn, tapping gently against the shed's tin roof like cautious footsteps. But by mid-morning, the sky cracked open and let loose everything it had. Water seeped through the warped wood, collected in shallow puddles along the floor. I shifted the crate I slept on to avoid the slow drip that had formed overhead. My blanket was already damp around the edges. Still, I was grateful for the noise. The rain muffled the ache in my bones, filled the hollow in my chest, where loneliness sometimes crept in like fog. On days like this, I welcomed the distraction. I had just finished boiling a pot of tea, black, bitter, no sugar, when I heard footsteps outside. Careful ones, hesitant. Not the bold stride of a stranger, someone who wasn't sure if they'd be welcomed. I opened the shed door a crack, and there stood a boy from the school, Micah, I think. Skinny as a beanpole, hair matted from the rain, one shoelace undone. He held out an envelope, half soaked. "Principal Harris told me to give you this." I took it with a nod, then grabbed an old towel and draped it over his head. "Next time, don't come out in this mess without a hat, you hear?" He grinned, teeth crooked and bright. "Okay, Miss Linda." Then he sprinted off, water splashing up to his knees. I shut the door, wiped the envelope dry with the edge of my sleeve, and sat down with the tea still steaming beside me. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. Adam. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to toss it straight into the fire barrel. Let it curl and blacken and turn to ash just like all the other words he never said when I needed them. But I didn't. Instead, I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might bite. The letter inside was short. Too short. 6 lines exactly. "Mom, Nora says you're being childish, but I told her this is just how you are when you're hurt. I know it's not easy for you being away. Jason misses you. I miss you too, even if you don't believe that. I'm hoping we can talk soon. Come home when you're ready. Adam." I read it twice, then a third time. Each word landed like a pebble in a dry well, small, hollow sounds that echoed too loudly. Not one mention of the burn, not one apology, not a whisper of regret for what they let happen. Just soft half-sympathy and a plea to return, like I was some pet who wandered off and needed coaxing back home. He still didn't understand. He didn't want to. I folded the letter back up and tucked it under the teacup, letting the heat wrinkle its corners. That evening I cooked anyway. I chopped onions while the rain pounded the roof, diced carrots while the thunder grumbled like a warning. I turned the stove up higher, poured in the last of the stock, and stirred with more force than necessary. The smell of the stew filled the shed, warm and savory, defiant against the damp. This was my home now, this crooked, leaking, stubborn place. It didn't care if I burned dinner, or didn't smile enough, or left dishes in the sink. It didn't demand I forget myself to be loved. At the school the next day, Mr. Harris was waiting at the door with a newspaper tucked under his arm. "You're in it," he said, his voice low but lit with something close to pride. I blinked. "In what?" He handed me the paper, already folded to the page. There I was. A full spread, blurry photo of me standing in front of the school kitchen, ladle in hand, surrounded by smiling kids. The headline read, "Local School Lunch Program Revived by Retired Grandmother." My throat went dry. It was a short piece, nothing fancy. But the writer had been kind. She wrote about the kids, about how test scores were up, attendance higher, how the new meals, my meals, had changed the energy of the school. She even mentioned the little card the students made for me, the one with the glitter and crayon knight. "They're calling you the kitchen guardian," Harris said with a chuckle. "I didn't even know we had a nickname system." I stared at the paper for a long time, unsure what to feel. I had spent so many years being invisible, bending myself into silence just to keep the peace. And now, people were reading about me over breakfast. They were seeing me, not as someone's mother, not as someone's burden, as Linda. I didn't cry. Not yet. That came later, when I was alone, sitting on the back step behind the school, the paper pressed to my chest. I thought about Adam's letter again. Let him wait. Let them all wonder what I was building out here, in the ruins of what they broke. Because the truth was, I hadn't just survived. I was becoming someone I never thought I'd have the courage to be. Someone no one would throw away again. The paper changed things. Not overnight, not with any fanfare, but subtly, like the shift of a season. Quiet, inevitable. People started stopping me in the market. Not to whisper behind their hands like they used to. Not to ask if I was the one who got put out by her own family. Now they smiled, nodded. They offered extra produce, asked if I needed help carrying things. A few even left little bags of rice or canned goods on the back steps of the school with notes that said things like, "For the kitchen guardian. Thank you." I didn't know what to do with the kindness at first. For years, I'd gotten used to love being laced with expectation. Smile more, talk less, don't get in the way. This was different. This was given freely, without strings. No one asked me to earn it. I kept the article folded in the back pocket of my apron, the edges soft and worn from how many times I read it when I thought no one was looking. Not because I needed the attention, but because it was proof. Proof that I had worth outside of what I gave to Adam or Nora or Jason. That I could be something without being their background character. A week later, I got a call from the school secretary, Ruth. She had a voice like gravel and a temper to match. We'd bonded quickly. "You've got a visitor," she said. "He says he's family." My heart thudded. I wiped my hands on a towel, smoothed my hair, and tried to steady the twist in my gut. I told myself it could be anyone. A cousin. Maybe even a cousin of a cousin. But I knew. I knew before I even stepped out the door and saw him standing there in the gravel lot, arms folded, suit jacket too thin for the wind. Adam. He looked smaller than I remembered, paler. The little lines near his eyes had deepened. His hair, once jet black, was threaded with gray now. And still, he wore that same guarded expression, the one that said he was about to spin a story and hoped I'd believe it. I didn't speak, just stared. He cleared his throat. "Hi, Mom." I nodded but said nothing. He shifted awkwardly. "I saw the article." Of course he did. He took a step forward. "You've done a lot here. People are talking." Still nothing from me. I wanted to see how long he could fill the silence before his conscience cracked. He ran a hand through his hair. "Listen, He stopped, started again. "Jason's been asking about you." That name cut, sharper than I expected. The last time I saw my grandson, his hand held a mug of boiling water, and his eyes held no remorse. And here Adam was, using his name like a key, trying to unlock a door I had welded shut. "I'm not coming back," I said finally. My voice was steady, cold. He looked up, caught off guard by how calm I sounded. "I never said you had to." I gave a small, bitter laugh. "You didn't need to. You let her say it for you. Every day. With her silence. With her rules. With every sideways glance that made me shrink in my own skin." His mouth opened, but I cut him off. "She let your son burn me, and you called me dramatic." The wind howled behind us like it wanted in on the conversation. He took another step. I didn't know it was that bad. You did, I said, more tired than angry. You just didn't want to deal with it. He was quiet then, truly quiet. After a long pause, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I know you won't come back, but this is from Jason. I hesitated, then took it. He didn't stay. He gave a half-hearted smile and walked off without another word. Just like always, leaving the weight behind for someone else to carry. Inside the envelope was a card, handwritten, clumsy lettering. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't mean to hurt you. I miss your food. I miss you. There was a drawing too, a crooked version of me standing in front of a stove, flames drawn too high, apron full of flowers. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I folded the card, placed it gently inside my coat pocket, and went back inside. Back to my kitchen. Back to the children who thanked me without having to be reminded. Back to the stove where my food meant safety. Back to the life I'd built. Not out of revenge, but out of the kind of love no one could twist anymore. Adam had come looking for a door. What he found was a woman who'd already closed it, locked it, bolted it shut with the fire of her own becoming. And that door? It wasn't opening again. That's the mistake people make. They think forgiveness is a door you walk through holding hands. It's not. Sometimes it's a window you open just long enough to let the pain out, then slam shut before it climbs back in. By noon, the children were lining up for lunch, laughter echoing through the hallways. I'd made a vegetable stew so thick it could stand a spoon upright. Fresh bread rolls too, buttery and golden, their scent spilling through the school like a promise. I sprinkled a little garlic salt over the top, just enough to make them say, mmm, before the first bite even touched their tongues. Principal Harris popped his head into the kitchen, clipboard in hand, eyes wide with mock panic. You trying to kill me, Linda? You know I can't eat gluten and now you've got the whole place smelling like heaven. I handed him a small bowl of stew. You'll survive. I took care of you. He took it without arguing and sat at the corner table we'd unofficially claimed as his. He ate quietly, nodding between spoonfuls. You should know, he said after a minute. There's talk of expanding this thing. A grant, maybe a proper kitchen, maybe a second staffer to help you out. I paused in the middle of washing a pot. A real kitchen? He nodded. State's been watching. They saw the numbers. Attendance is up. Behavior issues down. Even test scores are climbing. Something tight in my chest loosened. I wasn't just feeding bellies anymore. I was changing lives. Harris stood, dusting crumbs off his sweater. You've done more for these kids in a few months than some folks do in a career. I didn't have words for that. Not then. That night, I sat in the shed with the door cracked open. The sky was deep navy, stars faint behind a veil of winter haze. The fire barrel was low, but it warmed my toes, and that was enough. I pulled out the card from Jason again, unfolded it gently, smoothing the creases with my palms. I still didn't know what I'd do about him. He was a boy learning how to treat people by watching a man who stood still while others fell apart. If there was any hope for him, it was because I'd left. Because I'd made the absence loud enough to echo. Maybe in time, I'd send him a letter. Maybe I'd bake something and send it through the mail, my cornbread, the kind he used to sneak seconds of. Not because I was coming back, but because sometimes, even a broken bridge can cast a shadow worth resting under. A few days later, a package arrived at the school addressed to me. No return label. Inside was a brand new apron, thick, navy blue, with my name embroidered across the chest, Miss Linda. And beneath it, in smaller thread, stitched in gold, Kitchen Guardian. I traced the letters with my fingers. I could see it then, clear as the firelight dancing in front of me, the life I'd built from the scraps they left behind. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. And that, more than anything, was what they would regret losing. I wore the apron the next morning. It felt heavy at first, like it carried more than just thread and cloth. Maybe because it did. Maybe because it held every unspoken thank you, every quiet apology I never got, every piece of pride I thought I'd lost. I slipped it over my head and tied it at the back with steady fingers, not even bothering to smooth the wrinkles. I didn't need to look perfect. I just needed to be real. The kitchen was already humming by the time I arrived. Ruth had unlocked the back door early and left a thermos of coffee on the counter for me. She never said much, just grunted a hello, but I knew what that gesture meant. I was no longer a stranger here. This place, this role, this second life I'd stumbled into, it had become my own heartbeat. I pulled out the ingredients I'd scrounged the day before: a bag of rice, a few pounds of lentils, carrots that were soft around the edges, but still good enough if you trimmed them right. I lined everything up and began to chop, measure, stir. The rhythm was familiar now, almost meditative. The clink of the spoon against the pot, the hiss of onions meeting hot oil, the gentle bubble of broth. These sounds filled the spaces where silence used to ache. Halfway through prepping the stew, Ruth appeared in the doorway again, this time with a look I didn't recognize. "You've got another visitor," she said, voice clipped but tight with something else. Concern, maybe. "This one's, well, just come see." I wiped my hands and followed her down the hall, every step echoing too loud in the quiet. And then I saw her, Nora, standing in the front office, wrapped in a long gray coat, the belt pulled so tight it cinched her waist like a noose. Her hair was still perfect, her nails still glossy, but her face, that face that had once curled in disdain every time I entered a room, looked different now. Drawn, pale, edges dulled by something that looked an awful lot like desperation. She didn't speak first. That surprised me. When she finally did, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Linda, can we talk?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked outside, around the corner of the school where the wind couldn't reach us. She followed, heels clicking like thunder across the pavement, always dressed for a life more polished than mine. We stood there, surrounded by the brittle hush of winter branches. "I know you hate me," she began. I didn't correct her. She looked away. "Jason's not doing well." That name again. That lifeline they only pulled out when they needed to reel me back. "He's struggling in school. His teachers say he's angry, withdrawn. He barely speaks to us. Says we're not his real family. That you were." The words fell between us like broken glass. "He misses you," she said, swallowing hard. "We both do." I stared at her. This woman who once dragged me out by the wrist, who hurled insults like knives and made me feel like furniture in my own home. Now here she stood, trying to thread a needle through years of cruelty. "What do you want, Nora?" She blinked. I want to fix it." "You can't." Silence. I let it stretch. I wanted her to feel it the way I'd felt it every time I sat alone at the table while they laughed in the other room. Every time I heard my name spoken like a burden. Every night I laid awake wondering what I did wrong, when all I had ever done was love them harder than they deserved. She opened her mouth again, but I raised a hand. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I'm done. That's not the same thing." Tears gathered in her eyes. She looked at me like she finally saw something she couldn't undo. "I didn't come to beg," she said, voice trembling. "Just, if you ever want to see him, Jason, he still keeps your drawings. He still watches those old videos of you cooking. I looked away toward the playground, where children's laughter echoed like a memory. The wind had calmed, and the world felt unbearably still. You're only here now, I said slowly, because you lost the one person who made your life easier without asking for anything back. She flinched. I was never part of your family, Nora. I was your unpaid help, your safety net. And now that it's gone, you're realizing just how much you relied on it. Her shoulders sagged. The arrogance she once wore like perfume had faded. In its place was just a woman, tired, scared, grasping. I'm sorry, she whispered. And I believed her. But I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She left without another word. I stood there for a long time before returning to my kitchen, tying the strings of my apron a little tighter. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just went back to the stove, back to the children, back to the life I built with my own damn hands. They came to find the woman they once discarded. But I wasn't her anymore. She was gone. And I wasn't letting her come back. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the shed, listening to the wind twist through the gaps in the wood, the rustle of the trees like breath against the tin roof. The fire barrel had burned low, embers glowing like the last coals of an argument. I didn't feed it. I let the cold settle in, let it bite at my fingers and crawl up my spine. I wanted to feel it. Needed to. Some pains aren't meant to be numbed. Nora's voice echoed in my head, soft and trembling, not sharp like I remembered. But that didn't change the years that came before it. A single apology doesn't sweep away a decade of quiet cruelty. Not when the apology arrives only after the convenience leaves. Jason still keeps your drawings. He still watches those videos. He misses you. I pulled my coat tighter and stared at the ceiling. The words stirred something I didn't want to name. I had sealed that part of my heart shut, boarded it up, bricked it over with every insult, every silent dinner, every time Adam chose peace with his wife over standing up for his mother. But Jason, he wasn't the one who made me sleep in a shed. He wasn't the one who stayed quiet while I burned. He was a boy. And I was the one who'd taught him to say please, who tied his shoelaces, who kissed his forehead before school and waited at the door when he came home. Children repeat what they hear. Children mimic what they see. Children forget who raised them until the world stops coddling them. I sat up in the dark, lit a candle, and pulled out the card he'd made. Crayon hearts. A crooked figure in an apron. Misspelled words that looked like they were written in a hurry but with care. It wasn't enough to heal what had broken, but it was something. A start. I'd told Nora I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't lying. Anger is sharp, loud, hot. What I felt now was colder, heavier, like standing in front of a house that burned down and realizing the smoke's finally cleared, but there's nothing left to return to. Still, something in me whispered, you could call him just Jason, not Adam, not Nora, not the people who only remembered I existed when their lives began to fall apart. I didn't act on it. Not yet. But the idea sat with me, curled in the corner like a stray dog waiting for permission to come close. At school the next day, I cooked in silence. The stew was rich and hearty, beef this time, thanks to Mr. Barnett from the butcher shop, who'd started setting aside meat scraps just for me. I made mashed potatoes too, extra creamy, and even baked cornbread muffins, golden and cracked on top. I couldn't explain why, but I needed the food to be perfect that day. Like my hands knew something my heart hadn't said out loud yet. The kids noticed. Miss Linda, this is real food, one of the third graders said, mouth full and eyes wide. Like holiday food. I smiled and handed him a second muffin, After lunch, I sat on the back step of the kitchen and let the sun warm my face. It was weak, winter still clung to the air, but I soaked it in anyway. Across the field, I saw Principal Harris helping a kindergartner tie her shoelaces. He looked up, caught my gaze, and gave a small wave. I nodded back. This place, these people, they didn't know who I used to be. The version of me that tiptoed through a house that never felt like home. The one who apologized for everything, even the way she breathed. The woman who shrank herself so others could feel big. That woman was gone. And in her place stood someone who no longer waited to be invited in. I built my place here, brick by brick, bowl by bowl, bite by bite. With flour-dusted hands and burned fingers, and a heart that refused to stay broken. When the day ended, I returned to the shed, sat beside the fire barrel, and lit another candle. I didn't pick up my phone, but I did stare at it a little longer than usual. And for the first time, I wondered, not if Jason could be different than them, but if I was strong enough now to find out. The next morning, I reached for the phone before I could talk myself out of it. It felt heavier than it should have, like it remembered all the times I'd stared at it in silence, waiting for a call that never came, waiting for someone to notice I was gone. Now, here I was, thumb hovering over the contacts, heart thudding louder than it had any right to. I scrolled past Adam's name. I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop. I kept going until I found Jason's number, the one I'd saved years ago under my sunshine, back when he was still little enough to climb into my lap without shame. I hadn't dialed it since I left. The line rang 3 times before he picked up. Hello? The voice was deeper than I remembered. Still soft, but older. I didn't speak right away. My breath caught, locked somewhere between my ribs. Hello? He asked again, and this time there was something fragile in it, something unsure. Jason, I said, and my voice cracked on the second syllable. It's Grandma. There was silence, so long I thought maybe the line had dropped. Then I heard it. A breath. A small, shuddering exhale. Grandma? His voice broke too. I felt something snap inside me. A thread pulled too tight, finally letting go. I got your card, I said. I read it. He didn't answer right away, but I could hear movement, a door closing, footsteps. Then finally, in a whisper, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know. I know, I said quietly. You were a child. But Jason, you still are. And children learn what they're taught. Another pause. Then, slowly, like peeling back layers of shame. Mom said it was your fault. She said you were always difficult, that you made her life hard. I closed my eyes. Let the pain rise, crest, and settle. I know what she said, but I also know you watched me clean the kitchen every night. I know you saw me leave the table without eating. I know you saw the way I slept outside in winter. I thought that's just what grandmas did, he said, and my heart cracked open all over again. I felt myself trembling, not from anger, not anymore, but from the quiet grief of knowing how deeply the damage ran, how early the rot had started. He hadn't been cruel. He'd just been taught not to look too closely, taught to see me as part of the furniture, taught to treat me like the world treated women who gave too much. Jason, I said, steadying myself, I don't blame you. But I need you to understand something. I left because I had to. I left because no one else ever did what was right for me. And it was never my job to keep suffering just to make everyone else comfortable. He sniffled. I get it now. I really do. Everything feels wrong without you. I didn't let the words wash over me too fast. I didn't reach out and cradle them like they were enough. Because they weren't. They were a beginning. "I'm happy to hear from you," I said, "but I'm not coming back." "I know," he whispered. "I still love you." "I love you too." The silence between us was different now, no longer filled with ghosts. It was honest. It was clean. I ended the call gently, like closing the door to a room I could finally walk away from without guilt. Outside, the wind had changed direction. The trees shook, their bare limbs clicking like bones. The sky was pale, washed out, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. I returned to the kitchen at school with my head high and my heart quiet. The children ran to greet me like they always did, tugging at my sleeves, telling me stories with wild hands and mouths full of half-finished words. I ladled soup into bowls, buttered bread, wiped crumbs from chins. Not because I had to, because I chose to. Later, I sat in the corner of the kitchen, the smell of baked apples lingering in the air, and thought about the little boy who used to call me his sunshine. Maybe one day, when he was ready, he'd find his own light again. And maybe, just maybe, I'd still be shining too. That night, the wind carried a different kind of cold. Not the bitter, biting chill of winter, but something quieter, heavier. The kind of cold that settles into your chest when you finally said what needed saying. Not with shouting, not with vengeance, just with truth. I sat in the shed, the fire barrel burning low, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. My phone was still on the crate beside me, screen dark, but I could feel the weight of the conversation lingering like smoke in my lungs. Jason's voice echoed in my ears, apologetic, unsure, growing into something softer. I knew that voice. I had raised it, nurtured it, rocked it to sleep when it was too small to understand fear, to know what it meant to be pushed aside. He had remembered. And yet, I didn't feel relief. I felt real. Like I had stepped out of a long, exhausting dream and was finally wide awake. The truth is, love had always been my compass, but for too long, I'd let it guide me in circles. I kept trying to go back, thinking if I just gave a little more, forgave a little faster, maybe they'd see me. Maybe they'd remember that I once held their world together with wrinkled hands and weary feet. But they never looked, because I never made them. And now? Now they were learning what it felt like when the thing you took for granted stopped waiting. I looked down at my hands, raw from work, nails short and stained from chopping and stirring and lifting more than they were meant to carry. They didn't look like much, but these hands had raised a boy who became a man and fed children who'd never forget the warmth of a full bowl. These hands had stitched a second life out of torn threads. They were my proof. The next day, the school was buzzing. A small news team from the regional station had called to ask if they could do a segment on the lunch program. Something about community resilience, about local heroes, about how one woman brought heart back to a place long overlooked. I didn't want the attention. That wasn't why I did any of this. But Harris had looked at me with those watery eyes and said, "It's not just about you, Linda. It's about what hope looks like when it wears an apron and shows up every day." So I said yes. They arrived just after noon. 2 women with cameras and microphones, one young and bright-eyed, the other older, with a voice that had interviewed mayors and murderers alike. They weren't looking for drama. They were looking for truth, the kind that gets under your skin and stays. They filmed me cooking, stirring stew, kneading dough, serving the kids. They filmed the smiles, the thank yous, the way I touched each child's shoulder like they mattered, because they did, every single one. Then they asked if I'd sit for a short interview. We stood outside by the garden, the earth still bare, seeds tucked deep below the frost. The reporter leaned in gently. Miss Linda, if you could say one thing to the people who once overlooked you, what would it be? I stared at the camera, eyes steady, voice calm. I'd tell them this, I said. You don't break a person by taking away their place. You break them when you convince them they never had one to begin with. But I found mine. And it's stronger than anything they ever tried to bury me under. She nodded, lips pressed together, blinking fast. I could tell she hadn't expected that. I hadn't either. The segment aired that night. It wasn't long, maybe 6 minutes total. But it spread. People from town came up to me the next day, tears in their eyes. Some brought bags of flour, cans of beans, a new ladle. One woman who I barely knew handed me a thick winter coat and said, "You deserved better. This won't fix that. But maybe it'll keep you warm." I cried later. Not for the coat, for the seeing, for finally being visible. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their guilt. I had something better. A whole community that had once passed me by now stood beside me. And the woman they once overlooked? She was feeding them more than meals now. She was feeding them a reason to remember her name. 3 days after the segment aired, I came back to the shed and found a manila envelope sitting by the door. No note, no signature. Just my name, Linda Walker, written in the kind of rushed, slanted handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I picked it up slowly, heart beating a little harder than it should have. My hands were still dusted with flour from the morning's baking lesson. The kids had made cinnamon rolls for the first time. Half of them had used way too much sugar. The other half forgot to roll the dough tightly enough. But none of that mattered. The school hallways had smelled like Christmas morning. Joy had a scent. I was sure of it now. But standing there with that envelope in my hand, joy seemed like something distant. Something I had to hold carefully or risk dropping. I went inside, set the envelope on the crate beside the fire barrel, and just looked at it. The way you look at a box in the attic you're not ready to open. I knew who it was from. You don't forget your son's handwriting. Not when you've read it on crayon Mother's Day cards and high school essays and those quick scribbled notes that used to say things like, "Left early. Love you." I opened it. Inside was a letter, a photo, and a check. The letter was longer this time. No more 6 lines. Adam had written 2 full pages in his tight, slanted print. He talked about the segment, said people at work had seen it, that they came up to him in the hallway and said, "Your mom is something else." He said Jason had cried watching it, that he'd asked to record it and play it again before bed. Then came the part that made my chest tighten. "I see it now, Mom. All of it. What we did. What we let happen. We treated your love like a given. Like gravity. We just expected it to hold us up. But gravity gets tired, doesn't it?" I didn't know if I wanted to cry or laugh. He kept going, talking about how things at home had changed since I left. Nora was trying, he said. Going to therapy. Cooking again. Though Jason still barely touched her food. Then he got to the point. He wanted to help. Said he'd set up a donation fund for the school. That he was sorry it took strangers seeing my worth before he finally did. I looked at the check. $5,000. I set it aside like it was burning. Then I picked up the photo. It was of Jason. Sitting at the kitchen table, clutching one of the cinnamon rolls the kids had made. His face was lit with a crooked smile, cheeks puffed out like he'd bitten off more than he could chew. He was holding up a sign he'd drawn himself. "Miss Linda's kitchen is famous." My heart broke and healed at the same time. I sat for a long while, staring at the fire. When the flames began to die down, I tossed the check into the barrel. Not out of spite, but because the money was never the point. They could keep their guilt-wrapped bandages. I didn't want to be paid back. I wanted to never be devalued in the first place. But I did keep the letter. And the photo. Later that week, I hung the picture in the kitchen beside the children's hand-drawn menu. Right there, next to a rainbow-colored drawing of broccoli and a stick figure with giant oven mitts. The other kids asked who the boy was, and I just smiled and said, "Someone learning how to say thank you." That night, I went back to the shed and didn't feel cold. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by the family I lost. I was warmed by the family I had found. The ones who ran down the hall to hug me. The ones who called me kitchen guardian and meant it. The ones who knew the truth of who I was. Not because I told them, but because I showed them. Every day. One meal at a time. The night of the fundraiser, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. I'd borrowed a navy blue dress from Martha, the one she always said she was saving for her funeral, but secretly hoped to be buried in with her favorite heels. I had my hair pinned up, soft curls falling down the sides, and a string of old faux pearls around my neck that Principal Harris had found in a donation box and insisted I wear. Like the royalty you are. I stared at my reflection for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because I was changed. This woman in the mirror wasn't someone waiting to be invited. She had built her own table, made her own seat, and fed every damn soul around it. She looked proud and unmovable. Outside, the town hall was packed. More cars than I'd seen in years lined the dirt lot. Folding chairs filled every square inch of the room, and the air buzzed with laughter, clinking plates, the scent of roasted garlic and cinnamon. The fundraiser was the school's idea, a way to upgrade the kitchen, build a proper pantry, maybe even hire a second pair of hands. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else. It had become mine. The kids had made signs, painted banners that hung crooked from the ceiling with words like Miss Linda's Heart and Home Kitchen and Love Served Daily. The teachers had baked pies. One of the dads donated lemonade and stood behind a fold-out table beaming like he owned a Michelin star truck. When I walked in, the room went quiet for half a second. Then they clapped. All of them. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't awkward. It was real. From the gut. The kind of clapping that makes you feel seen without having to perform. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't have to. For once, I was allowed to just feel. The local band started playing, and the night unfolded in warmth. Harris gave a speech. He told them about the first time he saw me stir soup in that busted kitchen, and how he knew something special was happening. Ruth added that before I arrived, the kids used to ask if skipping lunch counted as fasting. People laughed. They handed over envelopes, dropped coins and bills into the old soup pot we'd placed at the front of the room, painted gold with glitter by the second graders. Every time someone made a donation, a child rang a tiny cowbell, and the crowd would cheer. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't swell any fuller, I saw him. Jason. Standing near the door, shoulders hunched, hands in his jacket pockets. No Adam. No Nora. Just him. Alone. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just stopped remembering him this way. Eyes quiet, unsure, searching. Our eyes met across the room. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just nodded. I nodded back. He didn't come any closer. He didn't try to steal the moment. He stood there for a while, then turned and walked back out into the night. And that was enough. He'd come not to pull me back, but to see what I had become. When the night ended and the soup pot had overflowed, I stayed behind to clean. The stars outside blinked like they were proud of me, and the wind didn't feel harsh. It felt like a hand at my back. Harris offered to drive me home, but I told him no. I wanted to walk. Every step across the gravel, every breath of cold air, every sound of crickets under the moon. It all reminded me I was still here. Still me. When I reached the shed, I didn't see broken wood or peeling paint. I saw the place where I had been reborn. And when I opened the door, I didn't step into a shelter. I stepped into a life I had built from the ashes of one I'd barely survived. No one saved me. I saved myself. And now, even the silence knew my name. Spring came in quietly, the way healing often does, without a grand announcement, without anyone realizing when, exactly, the cold stopped biting. One morning, I stepped outside the shed barefoot and found the grass soft under my feet. No frost, no sting, just earth, damp and forgiving. The trees were budding, and the sky held that clear, pale blue that only shows up after a hard winter has done its damage and moved on. I stood there for a moment, toes curling into the dirt, the birds singing their shrill morning songs like they'd been waiting for someone to listen. I tilted my face toward the sun and let it touch me, warm and honest. I closed my eyes and breathed in air that didn't hurt anymore. The garden behind the school was beginning to sprout. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil like shy children, cautious but determined. Carrots, peas, spinach. The kind of food that grows quietly but feeds you deep. I walked through the rows with my hands on my hips, inspecting each sprout like they were my own kin. In a way, they were. I had fed them. I had whispered to them when no one was around. I had told them stories about starting over and rising through dirt. That morning, I brought the children out to see. They ran through the rows, careful not to step on anything, shouting about what they'd name the vegetables when they were fully grown. One little girl pointed to a tomato plant and said, "That one's Linda Jr., because it's strong and round and kinda small but bossy." I laughed until I couldn't breathe. At lunch, we made sandwiches with fresh greens and leftover roast chicken. The bread was still warm from the oven. The kids said it tasted like a picnic in spring. They ate on the grass behind the school, legs crossed, shoes off, shirts untucked. They looked like freedom. After cleanup, I sat outside with a cup of tea, watching them from a distance. For a long time, I had measured my worth by whether or not Adam and Nora looked me in the eye. Whether Jason remembered to say thank you. Whether the silence at the dinner table was soft or slicing. But now, I measured it in simpler ways. Laughter, clean plates, the way the children ran toward me, not away. That was enough. That was everything. Martha showed up around dusk with a bottle of her homemade fruit wine and 2 glasses wrapped in newspaper. "We're celebrating," she said, marching past me into the shed like she owned it. I raised an eyebrow. "Celebrating what?" She uncorked the bottle, poured us both a glass. "Everything. You. Spring. The fact that Harris didn't burn the stew yesterday when you left him alone for 5 minutes." We sat out front, watching the sun melt into the hills, the sky painted in oranges and purples so bold it looked like someone had lit it on fire. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "when you first came back, I thought you were going to fall apart." I nodded. So did I. She turned to me, eyes sharper now, sobered by more than just wine. "But you didn't. You grew teeth." I looked down at my hands, calloused, burned, strong. "I didn't want to," I said. "I had to." Martha leaned back, arms behind her head. "Funny, isn't it? All that pain they gave you, thinking it would crush you, and it just turned you into steel." I sipped my wine and said nothing. Because she was right. And some truths don't need to be spoken twice. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not a text, not an email. A real letter, in an envelope, sealed and stamped and addressed by hand. It was from Jason. Inside were 2 things. A photo of him in a school uniform, holding a medal for his debate team, smiling shy but proud. And a short letter, Dear Grandma, I'm working on being better. I want you to know that. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to show you I'm trying. Loved, Jason. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't beg. It earned something instead. I stood up, walked over to the wall of the shed where I kept the kids' drawings, and tacked the photo and letter right beside the one he'd sent me months ago. Side by side. Then I picked up a pen and paper, and I wrote back. Dear Jason, thank you. That medal looks like it came from more than just words. It looks like it came from heart. Keep going. I'm still here. Love, Grandma. I mailed it the next day. Not as an invitation, but as a declaration. He wasn't the only one becoming something better. As I walked back through the schoolyard, the breeze caught the edge of my apron and lifted it like a flag. The kids were inside now, napping or reading or scribbling things into notebooks they'd forget about by next week. But I remembered. I remembered everything. The silence, the cold tile floors, the burn, the door slamming shut, my name being said like a burden. And now my name was painted on a wall in bright letters. Miss Linda's kitchen. Not out of pity, but because I had stayed when it was easier to leave. Because I had built something out of nothing. Because they couldn't break me. Because I was never theirs to ruin. I used to think the worst thing a person could feel was being unloved. But I was wrong. The worst thing is being needed, but never valued. To be tolerated, not treasured. To be depended on for meals and laundry and comfort, but never truly seen. They used to tell me I was lucky. Lucky to have a roof. Lucky to be included. Lucky to have a place in their home. But a place isn't the same as a home. And being needed isn't the same as being wanted. The day I walked out of that house with nothing but a burn on my arm and a suitcase that weighed less than my silence, I thought I was losing everything. I didn't realize I was finally making room. Room for a town that remembered my name. Room for a school where laughter spilled through lunch lines and thank yous came without prompting. Room for children who lined up with empty plates and eyes full of trust. Room for a life that didn't ask me to shrink in exchange for survival. And now, when I look back, when I trace every moment from the slammed door to the seed-sprouting garden, I don't feel regret. I feel rebirth. I didn't just walk away. I rose. So to anyone who's ever been told to be quiet, to be grateful, to stop making a fuss, to anyone who's been used up, dismissed, pushed aside, let them call you dramatic. Let them roll their eyes. Let them think you'll come crawling back. Then get up. Pick up what little you have left. And leave. Take your love, your loyalty, your strength. Take everything they thought they'd never miss. And build something so beautiful, they can't speak your name without tasting what they lost. Because I promise you, the people who once threw me away, they're still talking about what I took with me. And they always will. Thank you for being here. Her journey was heavy, but it led her back to herself. Watch another powerful story by clicking on the left, and don't forget to subscribe for more voices that deserve to be heard.